someone who represented the debtor.
So I explained to him.
You know what I'm going to introduce my. So, I guess I'm it's not local. I have my own paper waiting. I'm just that's what's got to reach. And it was like 16
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. So let me, without further ado, give you the mic over to our distinguished Executive Director, Margie Russell. Thank you, Margie.
Thank you, Greg. Welcome, everyone. Okay, well, the program today is gas line connections, and we all know that it's a very important topic. And it's not just about bringing in a new gas service to your building and all the problems that could happen with that connection. It's about the connections that you deal with every day. So whether it's an alteration agreement that you're going to approve, and even though the alteration agreement says that they must comply with every government rule and law and every agency's dictates, and everything gets signed off and the building department approves it, but when the demolition is done, you walk in there and you see a gas branch line hanging down in the middle of what's supposed to be the person's dining room. And someone didn't say, wait a minute, we don't allow any changes to our gas line system, whether it's a branch or a riser. Now that's a building's decision. The building department certainly allows it, and the licensed plumbers certainly do it every day, and the professional engineers approve those drawings, but in reality, every time you touch it, you are creating a possibility for a leak. And that can play havoc for so many reasons. So we're going to hear from three fine gentlemen: Peter Funk, an attorney; David Brijlall, a professional engineer; and Stephen Schulman, an attorney. And each of them are going to introduce their own firm and give you a minute or two on what the firm's specialties are. What we're going to hear first from Peter is some of the bigger picture. He is a specialist in utility law and everything that comes right down to the stove. So from the utility down to putting on this, what we used to have was a pilot light. And then David will come in and give us some real nitty-gritty mechanical issues on pressure tests and what is involved with that. And then you'll hear again from Peter. And then Steve Schulman is going to address the warrant of habitability issues, whether it's a tenant or whether it's a condominium owner or a co-op shareholder. And then before we break for lunch, we will hear from Howard Rothschild on a different topic, giving us the first report of any organization on the strike settlement details. So with that, Peter Funk.
Thank you, Margie. Thank you, Greg. I'm pleased and honored to be here today. Margie said I could introduce my firm. My firm is Funk and Zeifer, LLP. We specialize in energy and utility law. And the areas I work in include energy efficiency, lighting, cogeneration, solar. We also represent utility customers dealing with utilities. All right, I spent years representing gas and electric utilities, in fact, outside general counsel to a gas and electric utility. And I've had a lot of experience with gas problems, such as the explosions and issues of leaks. Today's program came about as a result of the explosion in East Harlem, which raised everybody's consciousness. It's not overstating to say that we live in a sea of gas. It's underneath us, it's around us in our buildings, and it's usually detectable because it has an odor in it. And now that's obvious and something you know, but I will say at the onset, this, the product of my experience, if you think you might possibly be smelling gas in this case, if you feel the slightest, I don't know, I really don't want to bother anybody, bother them. Call up the utility. The utility would rather come 100 times to a false alarm than miss one. And I'll talk about some instances. Now, gas has to be at a particular percentage in the atmosphere to be explosive. And we, as you'll see a little bit later, we're short on time, but I may have a chance to go through these examples. Sometimes gas will accumulate in the walls, and only the faintest gas smell is in the room itself. And you do something ordinary like flipping the switch. That creates a spark. And in one case, a whole house went up. The gas was just in the interior spaces of the wall. Now, cast iron mains. In New York, we have a very, and not just in New York City, upstate Kingston, places like that, we have some very old cast iron gas mains. The gas iron main in the East Harlem explosion that is being looked into, not only by the PFC in Con Edison, but the National Safety Transportation Board. Very rare that they get involved in a case like this. It's very significant. These are very old. And here's a case of what can happen. A woman went on a nice vacation, came back, walked into her house, flipped the switch, and the whole house blew up. She was knocked back about 15 feet. Doesn't really recall whether she smelled gas or not, doesn't recall actually exactly what happened. What did happen? A water main was being repaired in the street. It was right next to a cast iron gas transportation pipe. Under the rules, and there are a series of rules, but one is 753. It is a rule that covers exactly what you have to do. You have to notify before you excavate. And I'll say a few words later about what excavation is. It's a lot broader than you might think it is. In this case, they repaired the water main and they dug around the gas main to get space to repair the water main. What they were required to do and what they didn't do was to fill in adequately underneath the 8-inch. It was actually another 8-inch gas main. They didn't fill in underneath. And it settled just a little bit. And it cracked just a little bit because these old cast iron pipes are brittle. The gas might have accumulated in the street, under the street, migrated along a lateral. Along the street, there are service lines, we would call them laterals, that go into houses. It went into the trench, went into the house, seeped up into the house. It wasn't a lot, but she was away on a vacation. And it accumulated in the house, and hence the explosion. It sounds to me that this may have been what happened in this case, and it may have been that the gas accumulated in areas other than rooms. That's why maybe there was a faint gas smell. Another occasion, a backhoe. You are not supposed to go within 4 inches of a gas. You can't use high-powered, big-powered tools any closer than 4 inches to a gas pipe when you dig in the street. This guy was using a backhoe to do a big repaving job. And the backhoe dug up one of the service laterals, same thing. Gas, he covered up the street. There was now a hole in the pipe. It leaked into a home. In this particular case, it was only in the walls. A woman walked up to the second floor of the house, didn't smell. She thought she might have smelled something. Again, flipped the switch. When she flipped the switch, the house partially blew up. And I went up to see that house, and it was amazing. It was a real fire. It was all, you could see that it had gone down to the basement and had done what firemen call alligatoring. It was all up the sides and in the walls. It was terrible. She was very politically well connected in this area, and this was the utility just got slammed. It was very bad. And finally, for examples, I recall one where I got a call, and they were out in the field, and somebody thought they might smell gas in a location. Now, way back then, this goes back a number of years, they had people with educated noses who would go in and smell. Now they use something called a CGI, a combustible gas indicator, and there are many different models, and it will tell you if you have a level of gas. But she really didn't want to bother anybody, called the gas company. Gas company came up. He took out his, it smelled him like there might be gas. He took out the CGI and he started shouting to everybody to immediately evacuate the building. It wasn't a house, it was like an office building. No sooner did the last person got out than the house went up, and it was an automatic timer that set a spark. Now, we also saw a lot of problems that were caused by gas appliances inside houses, inside buildings where people wouldn't properly maintain them. A utility, if they go in and see a dangerous condition, in certain cases will do something called red tagging. They'll put a tag on it. And before they will hook up, the owner has to correct the situation. The wisdom of all this is be extremely careful. I really can't emphasize enough the worst kind of situation is someone who, I really don't want to bother anybody. I don't really know exactly what it is. I want to be concise here. I will point out there are a number of laws that are important to know if you're in the excavation area. And I'm going to talk about those laws very briefly, and then I'm going to read, if I might, just one short paragraph that defines an excavation. Now, looking through, one of the laws that you need to be aware of is, this is the Public Service Law 119B, 119B. This is the protection of underground facilities, and it describes...
Peter, close to the mic.
I'm sorry. How much longer do I have, Margie?
You've got another 7 minutes and then we close.
7 minutes?
Yeah. 5 to 7.
All I need for this wonderful audience. Okay. That'll let me cover what I need to cover. 119B covers what you need to know on a general level. It's not a regulation, it's a law. Now, another one that is, and I'll summarize it to a certain extent, is it's Code Rule 753. And that really takes you through, if you read this code rule, it describes the one call center, you're doing excavations, you call. You have to call, you need to get a utility response. The utility will come in and mark out the street. Now, I've been doing this a long time. I actually worked on the original one-call agreement in New York State, going back a number of years. I won't tell you how many years I've been practicing, but I will, 40. But you have to pre-mark. Then there are rules about how you conduct excavations, replacing for instance, as I discussed earlier, replacing what has to go underneath pipes. And the definition of an excavation: any operation for the purpose of movement or removal of earth, rock, pavement, or other materials in or on the ground by use of mechanized equipment or by blasting, digging, augering, backfilling, boring, drilling, grading, fence posts, pile driving, tree removal, saw cutting, jackhammering, trenching, tunneling. It goes on. The exceptions are few. The exceptions are movement of earth by tools manipulated only by human or animal power. Animal power is falling out of favor in New York City. But upstate recognizes the value of agricultural purposes and a certain other, but it really, you can see excavation is very broad. If you see excavation going on in front of your building, my recommendation would be to be somewhat more alert to the possibility that gas could be escaping. Unlikely, fortunately we don't have many instances. Con Edison issued a press release after the gas, which I have here. I won't read that to you, but the sum and substance is, we've done this, we've done that, we've done the other thing, and they have. But the point is that something went wrong. It's like I followed all the directions, but I didn't get there. And Con Edison does work I can just tell you from having worked with utilities, Con Edison works very hard in trying to avoid this kind of situation. It's the very last thing they want. But you can see it's really tricky. You know, well, they found some gas in the soil. How did it get into the building? In this case, the explosion was so violent, I think it really destroyed some of the evidence, so to speak. So we'll see what they have to say. But the lesson is, if you see an excavation out in the street, be cautious. Now, in some cases, when you're managing a building or you're in the plumbing role, the general contractor role, you're asked to do excavation. You should be very familiar with all of these rules. We actually, when I was representing the utility, we had to go into court a number of times to get restraining orders against contractors who we believe were engaging in dangerous practices. I mean, we became very concerned. One example is using a backhoe. And you can see why a contractor would want to use it. Why? It's faster. Faster I get done, it doesn't involve as much manpower. You know, it's irritating to have to go in with hand tools and expensive. Yes, but it's safe. The final point is, sure, there are damages involved. The Public Service Commission can impose severe fines upon utilities. There are damages that individual contractors can be exposed to. There are, I think it's Section 36 of the General Business Law covers circumstances and fines, and you can look that up. I don't need to read it to you. I have now gone 7 minutes, Margie. So there she is. So I will defer to.
Right, but you're coming back. You're just this is the introduction.
Oh yes, you haven't.
Preamble.
You haven't seen the last of me.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. David, please introduce Grand Engineering.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. My name is Dave Brijlall with Rand Engineering. We're a mid-sized firm located on 25th Street and 7th Avenue in Manhattan. Full service, so we handle mechanical, electrical, plumbing design, architectural design. We have a structural department. We also have in-house expediting and waterproofing teams. So we like to consider ourselves building doctors. Our main exposure to the gas world has been within buildings, gas connections for oil to gas conversions, and ancillary return of services to buildings that have either had gas leaks, failed pressure tests, or have to go through an inspection of the existing gas piping. So my experience and my discussion today will be just some of the pitfalls and caveats that we come into when we're dealing with apartment alterations, riser work, new services, or investigations of gas leaks. Now, I was just curious, how many people have dealt with gas services to entire buildings being shut off? So we've got about 3 or 4 hands, and I'm just wondering how many of those people has the process from gas shut off to gas turn on been less than 3 months? Has it been more than 3 months? So it's about half and half. So it shows the variability that things can be different and be difficult depending on what we're dealing with. Now, starting small, I think many of us come into apartment alterations. Residents have their kitchens. We're not going over wet over dry issues here, but they want to relocate the stove to another side of the footprint, to another end. So generally, we're going to be allowing that work, but as long as you're working from the shut-off valve to the appliance, you're not moving it. So they're going to say, okay, my apartment has its own meter and its own riser. Can I just work on that riser? I want to run a new riser, and I want to work on the branch line and repipe in the apartment. Again, we don't allow that, because that riser goes to a lot of other apartments. And if that riser failed, if they did work, then they would need to rerun a new riser. And risers can't be run in stairs, can't be run in public corridors. There's very limited options. So one of the main things for that argument comes from the fact that any gas piping to these apartments, whether it's taken out of service, like they'd shut off a riser and put back into service, reactivation at the riser at the end of the work, or new gas piping, the branch line to their fixture, has to be tested and pressure tested. And that pressure test, your plumber is going to take care of that, but it's generally 3 pounds per square inch for 30 minutes. It's got to hold the pressure. So part of not allowing that smaller alteration to move forward on the riser is that you'll be affecting other lines. Older lines, buildings are getting older. So older lines that have been in service 20, 30 years, they're going to start failing. And then once they fail, we now have the investigation, where do we run that new line? And you're saving that particular apartment alteration, that resident, a lot of headaches. So we're just standing fast that any alteration, any relocation has to be done from the shut-off valve in the apartment. Now that's one of the smaller concerns. Obviously, we can always hold fast to that stance, that alterations are somewhat limited. But when we're getting into larger problems, we have gas leaks. Gas leaks can occur multiple locations. It can occur at the meters, it can occur at fittings, threads that have failed on risers, it can occur due to some accidental renovation that affected a chase. Now, restoration of gas service is one of the most, and understandably so, prohibitive functions that can happen. There are so many restrictions on where and what type of piping can be done. One of the biggest ones is no new gas piping in public stairs, egress corridors, even secondary egress. Now, generally, what needs to be done is that you have to construct a new fire-rated chase. And it doesn't just have to be fire-rated, it has to be impact resistance, has to design for seismic restraints in light of 2008 codes. All depending on what those inspectors and the plan examiners have in mind when the work's being filed. We've gone through processes where we've had to file 5, 6, 7 times just because at every step of the process, the plumbing inspector would identify additional work that needed to be done. So we can expect a bit of an iterative process for getting that gas service back. Now that's the riser. And the riser, it can't be an existing fire-rated construction. The city has said if you're doing it within a cavity of a demising wall, it's not going to be permitted. We're not allowed to do that. We can move it 1 inch into the apartment, and that's going to be allowed. It's just, we can't do it anywhere that's going to be egress, fire-rated, or accessible by people in an emergency condition. So as we're running that line, we have to do rated, UL-listed, fire-rated construction. But where are we going to put it? We're going to put it in a service corridor. We're going to put it within the apartments, trying to channel through every finish, every kitchen, getting behind cabinets. So it's always a consideration. It's always a bit of a hunting game. Your best bet, identifying what's failed. And your plumber is going to be invaluable here. Trace down the lines, use the shutoffs in the basement, and start testing, pressure testing every riser. So you start cutting it down. Okay, riser A failed the pressure test from the basement. Maybe at the midpoint, we can save and do a 5th, or if it's a 12-story building, a 6th floor pressure test. So your plumber is going to be instrumental in identifying that work scope and where the restoration is going to be needed. Now granted, he's going to be doing that pressure test in accordance, of course, 30 minutes, 3 psi. So we have a regimented plan for addressing and identifying what needs to be restored as part of any failure. Now, moving down, if we were identified and suitably constructed and repiping the new gas line, on activation, we have to coordinate that with Con Ed. Con Ed is not going to do it until that plumber is proven and repressure tested and they've witnessed that activation of the line. So it all can be a very laborious and time-intensive process. So what do we do with the residents during that testing period? There's holidays, Passover, Thanksgiving, major events. Buildings have done food vouchers, electric cooktops, restaurant vouchers, temporary housing, and other locations, just to accommodate certain residents. Some buildings, instead of restoring the gas service, have elected to, perhaps we don't need gas. If you're small enough, maybe we can get away with permanent electric cooktops if the residents support it. And all we need to do is restore the gas for our hot water heater or our boilers. That's worked in smaller 6-story buildings where you have 1 or 2 residents per floor. So the attacks and the ways to get back that gas service, at least for the riser component, can vary. We want to get everyone back, we want to get part of them back. Now, what happens when you smell gas in the basement? Obviously, calling the utility is paramount. You have to alert them. But some building owners have looked to their plumbers. Do that investigative work. Let's see if we can fix it. Is it just my gas meter that's leaking? Maybe I can do a soap test and find that out. If it fails and the plumber can't identify it, those same buildings have reached out to Con Ed. But the biggest fear is that Con Ed's going to come and just shut me off. I can't have it be voluntarily shut off, and I know all of my risers are going to fail. So what they've done is reached out to gas operations. You tell them you suspect there's a leak, and we'll probably need to maintain the service to the building. I can't drop my building. So what they sometimes do is try to bypass and provide temporary pressure through bottling through either an existing duplex meter, a bypass connection at the base of the building. So we're notifying them of the condition, but we're also requesting that provisions be taken so that not to drop the building. So I don't have to go through the 3 or 6 month process of testing every line and restoring the service. So there are ways to proceed. Now, once we advise them of the need to maintain the service to the building, they may ask that you sign hold harmless letters or certain agreements with them to make sure that the bottling service, they're not responsible. If it fails the main pressure, you have to let them off the hook. Con Ed's generally not inclined to do anything unless you let them off the hook. That same thing comes up with the all-to-gas conversions. There's a hold harmless letter there that they'll take best efforts to maintain the service to the building, but if they don't, so what? They leave that up to you to address. So we touched on a couple of things. The apartment alterations have their own set of standards. We're generally not touching risers. When we're doing restorations, there are provisions on where those risers can be, the type of construction. The work has to be filed and approved, so you want to get that out of the way before you start anything. Otherwise, you'll have plumbing inspections and more objections to that work. When you're citing gas or have the evidence of gas leak in the building, there are a couple of steps to take, either notifying the utility, having the plumber do some preliminary investigation if it's warranted, and then notifying the utility with the intent to maintain service. And so that's mainly the conditions that we'll be finding ourselves in. The only other time that in our line of work that the gas service is really affected is during the all-to-gas conversions. Now, typically, we're bringing in a second service. We're not generally affecting the primary service of the building until there's a point where the lines have to connect. The new service for the new boiler, is generally suitably sized to handle everything in the building. So we need a way to bring the domestic service and everything else to connect to it. So there's always a point where Con Ed will come in and coordinate that. The pressure test of the new line will have already been done by the plumber. Con Ed's going to come in and make provisions to not drop the building and either backfeed through an existing meter or an existing bypass connection and maintain the service while the piping's being connected to the new line. Generally, we're always seeing a new line taking everything. It usually costs about $100,000 to maintain 2 services to a building. That's why you see in these all-to-gas conversions, we're taking either our new high-pressure service or a new low-pressure service and picking up the cooking and laundry service for the building. So in that consideration, when the gas is being affected, the concerns are that is Con Ed going to be able to hold the building service temporarily, keep it active while this work is going on, and is everything going to check out in terms of the metering and the new piping being pressure tested. Generally, your plumber is going to take care of that. They have the sign-offs, they'll have the inspection prior to the the lines being activated, and Con Ed is not going to proceed until the DOB issues their blue card for the gas lines. So you have a fair number of processes in place to make sure that everything is done safely. Now, that was a quick overview on those facets that we're involved with. I'm not going to turn off the mic. Back to Peter.
Thank you very much. Now, that was the building owner's perspective. Keep the gas flowing. The utility perspective is different. There were some very good points that Dave raised. The reluctance to call Con Edison to avoid an interruption, to avoid all the issues that he mentioned is there. My concerns, looking at it from the utility point of view, are a little different. I can recall a utility coming up. It's not gas, or it's, for example, in Brooklyn, we smelled a smell coming up. It certainly smelled a little bit like gas to me. I called then Brooklyn Union. They came over. Turned out a woman was spraying her dog that had been in Prospect Park for ticks with a solution of like DDT, and it really smelled. But it was better to be safe than sorry in that case. As to a situation, it's hard to give advice because of the liabilities and the dangers relative to any detection of gas odor and any smelling of gas odor. My inclination is to be on the safe side, but I can understand the points that Dave was raising. I just have a couple of other points. One, relighting. Relighting is a huge problem for utility systems as well. I can recall where an interior transmission line in the gas distribution system went down. A truck had in an excavation area, a truck had actually run into the line, destroying the line, and the utility had to go around and make sure that stoves, gas heaters were relit in many, many different homes. It's nightmarish. The last thing a utility wants to do is take down its gas system. When I've talked to clients about potential cogeneration systems that are fueled from street gas, one of the points I make is that the reliability, for the reasons I just mentioned, is very high. I did have one additional point that I discussed with Margie, and I just thought I'd mention. It's in the gas area. I have had clients come to me recently after this very cold winter who have received notices regarding their interruptible gas service or their temperature-driven gas service on Con Edison's tariff or Nat Grid's tariff. You can get interruptible gas at cheaper prices than you can get firm gas because there's not enough gas transportation in the New York area. So the deal is if it's cold, they need more gas, or if there's a gas interruption, you have to switch over. And if you don't switch over, you get socked with a very, very serious financial penalty. Can be up to 9 times the cost of gas. I had a client who called me up. They were hit with a $75,000 charge. Yes?
So you're trying to say that we should pay rule? When we do conversions, rule should be the answer, not to pay cash?
Well, that's interesting. Because Con Edison may, for a gas conversion, they might require that you take firm gas and you take it for a period of time, and that you eliminate your capability to burn oil as consideration for doing the gas conversion. I mean, so I've seen situations in which the oil tank actually, holes had to be put in the oil tank. I'm suggesting something a little different. What I'm saying is be very careful before you go on to an interruptible or a heat gas tariff, you have to make sure that you have a 24/7, holidays included, ability to switch over to oil. Because if you don't, unless it's the utility's fault, which isn't very often, say you didn't get the notification or their equipment failed, but if I have a decision right here, the one decision I located in the area, which is by a hearing officer who I happen to know, and he was right. He said that National Grid was correct in charging the fee. The owner had said, well, my oil burner didn't work. I have a building full of tenants. I'm required to keep them warm under city code. It's not an excuse. If you don't switch over to oil when you're supposed to switch over, you can look through the tariff. I won't walk you through it today. The Public Service Commission rules are quite specific on this point. It is a benefit. You can get gas at cheaper rates, but you have to be able to switch. And I've been consulted a number of times over the years by clients outraged that they were charged this amount, but that was the deal. So be cautious. You can do it, but you have to have a very, very robust ability, and your equipment has to be working. Your equipment has to be working perfectly, because these things can come. The temperature can drop below, say, 15 degrees. In many cases, they refer to the Central Park temperature. So it drops below 15 degrees. Could happen in the middle of the night. Now they want to switch over. And the building doesn't switch over. If your superintendent is asleep, you're not aware of it, you have just encountered a very significant charge. Okay, that's...
But just one more further on that. So if the temperature drops, as you had mentioned when we first talked about this, the temperature drops every night. See, right? You've got it above freezing, below freezing, whatever it is, whatever that line of demarcation is, on and off throughout the night, and the building doesn't even know that they should have, could have, and then they get the bill. So it's like it could just be for like a couple of hours or for 15 seconds. I mean,
that's a great question, and I don't have a great answer. Generally, they want you to switch over at that point, and then when you switch back when you're authorized to do so. It's not when the temperature rises a few degrees. But I would have to be. This is certainly a question that I would run by. I'd actually have to check the individual tariffs further to determine exactly when you could switch back. Usually, you wait for a notification, or if you're interruptible, you might have 4 hours notice to switch to oil for a period of time. They look at the temperatures. For gas, it triggers back and forth. I think that thinking about it on my feet, the answer is probably that if you're an automatic, the answer is if you're in an automatic system, it will move it back and forth, the gas and oil. The equipment will do it on an automatic basis. What I was concerned about is there's the partially automatic. That's another element. If it's partially automatic, that's more of a problem. But the utility will install equipment that will take care of it. The problem is if for some reason your boiler doesn't fire when it's supposed to fire on oil, that's where the liability can occur. So I think I partially answered the question.
well, and so we will definitely get to the bottom of it. And before this session is over, if there's any plumbers or engineers in the audience that can that specs this out and installs it and knows how it then backs into the actual billing, because it's one thing to say, well, it works, but how does it back into the actual billing? So we'll get an answer to it.
That would be interesting if there's a plumber here who could.
Well, there are. Anyone? Okay, or you could go up front, whichever. I like the one on the mic on the left.
Oh, it'd be great to have.
Yes, thank you. And just introduce your name and your company.
Hi, my name is Kirk Seubert from Maxwell Plumb Mechanical. As far as Con Edison and National Grid, they both, when they require you to switch, they usually give you between 4 and 24 hours notice, and they make sure that you switch. We recommend to our customers that they always do it initially so that there's no problems. They can find out if there is a problem with the oil burner right away, and then they can be prepared for it, and keeping the oil burner up and running, making sure there isn't an issue. They do have automatic switchover. Most of the time their capacity is not enough where every building has the automatic switchover, so if you have the manual one, it's a matter of keeping your supers informed and making sure that they know not to go downstairs because the oil didn't turn on, that they switch it back over to gas. Because that's where you get the fines and penalties. Because both National Grid and Con Edison have a way of checking the meter is spinning when it's not supposed to. So they will know. It's not just a matter of, some people bypass the changeover switch or something, but it's actually in the meter. They know whether the thing is spinning when it's not supposed to, and that's where you get the fines and penalties.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, yes, Alex. Thank you. Alex Weiss. Continue.
Weiss, professional engineer. You know, another problem is that with the climate change, we have longer freezing conditions, and some owners change to dual fuel, but they decide, okay, why I need so much fuel to hold, I will change it to a smaller storage. And you run out of oil very quick, and you call your company, and obviously when you need oil, then everyone needs oil, and they will not come to fill up your 275-gallon oil tank, and you have no option, right, like to run on the expensive gas. So please keep in mind that you have enough capacity, at least like for 2 weeks, to run your boiler. Thank you.
That was great.
You were asking a question about the combustible gas indicator?
Yes.
Okay. There are a number of different models of that. These are widely used by utilities. They're typically handheld devices. And the question is?
They different. The question, the FDNY and Con Ed uses. And I'm asking is because 4 days ago, one of my tenants called in and said, I have a gas leak. Con Ed, fire department came, evacuated the entire building, found nothing wrong with it, told everybody to go back. Con Ed came in 30 minutes after everybody was in and shut only one stove. But they have a different kind of meter, reading this kind of things, that it was different?
That's interesting.
Okay, we
I
have
think-
a plumber who can answer.
Yeah, I know that they're combustible gas indicators, whether
They're different. They use a handheld.
Okay, if you could, thank you.
I'm not familiar with the fire department.
And then just repeat the question a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the question was just if they're a little bit different between what the fire department uses and what the utility uses. The utility uses the most expensive units that are out there and the most sensitive.
Okay, we're talking detection.
Detection devices, yes. The fire department just uses small handling like your super, or we may use. The ones at the utility, it's a lot more sensitive, so they'll pick up gas, whereas the fire department might not.
Okay, and just, now, what do they detect? Is it, what property of the gas is it detecting?
It's the methane, but you will also get, on the smaller devices that aren't as good, you will get false readings as well. So you have to be careful when your supers or people that you're working with are using them, because they'll get a false reading off of paint, off of sprays, off of other things that might be in the room. So you have to be very careful with what you're doing.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah,
Very good.
it's the percentage. The utility CGIs look at, they detect the gas, but they will also indicate if it's a dangerous level of gas. Because a few wisps of gas is not necessarily going to be explosive. It may indicate that in the building, there are other places like pockets where you have to look. Any smell of gas is potentially dangerous. But if you hold a CGI, it will say they're, the expensive ones that the utilities use will give you different readings, one of which is percentage of gas. Like when it hits the minimum percentage that is explosive, you better exit quickly. Are there any other questions?
Thank you, Peter.
Okay.